Hello and welcome to Angel's Costumes Behind the Scenes. I'm Jeremy Angel.
I'm Richard Green.
And I'm Jonathan Lippman. I'm proud that we've got the opportunity to introduce our chats with Morgan Large today.
It's a lovely interview, and you covered some interesting things. And there was something I actually wanted to ask you, Jonathan, which you've had the sort of same experience. How much pressure is put on you as a designer when you are doing something that is so established in people's minds? I mean, Morgan's got Joseph and a few other things, but you had it with Fiddler. And do you fight it a lot? Fight trying to ignore what came before at all?
I wouldn't say fight it, but the conversations that take place when you know that the job is yours, and perhaps a little bit is touched on when you are at the interview stage, essentially focuses the direction of where you're going to take it. And there would be no point in mounting a production, however beloved and familiar it is in people's memories, experiences, to just repeat it. So the endeavor is always to create the same effect and have the same reaction, especially if the production was a success in all its previous lives, but to have presented it your way with your concept. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, would you go back and would you actively stay away from watching it in any or looking at any of those images at some point, just to not cloud what you're doing? Or
Well, I would, because I'm curious about every aspect of the life of whatever it is, and I'll always, if it's a musical or a play, I'll always endeavour to see what they had done in order for me to then not repeat that, I suppose. But where your question is really interesting is actually in the experience that Morgan and I have had together when I've worked with him as his costume designer, because the three musicals that we've worked on, Violet, Death Takes a Holiday, and The Woman in White, in their previous lives, they've always been considered flawed pieces, and for different reasons. And the director that we were working with on the three of those jobs has become a master of taking flawed projects and revisiting them in terms of every aspect: staging, narrative, music, design. And they were all three amazing experiences, and both Morgan and I relish the opportunity of being able to work on a very tight budget with quite constricted circumstances in terms of our environment and our timings, and to have received quite good notices for the work.
yeah, I hope you don't ever mind. I know Richard does the same as well. It's you as a designer. It's always interesting. We've got this opportunity to anything that gets sort of left hanging in the interviews, or that it's not confuses, but just raises questions. I always appreciate being able to go, well, you're a designer, you answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, in some productions, am I not right in thinking that there is actually a book? I'm thinking of Les Mis, which seems to go around the world in various places being performed. But I think, aren't those costumes kind of locked to a certain extent?
It depends on who's producing that production.
When NBA was still churning out Les Mis for Holland or Japan or wherever, there were sort of set fabrics that were used for the Thénardier walk down dress and costume and things like that.
But that's because it was a Cameron Mackintosh produced production.
That's the point I'm trying to make. That some of these things that you will see the same costumes on productions around the world because it's locked in. Whereas with yours, Fiddler on the Roof, it's separated.
The producers secured the rights to mount a production that didn't need to follow the criteria of the original,
but still use the same songs and the same script,
yes.
Right? Because the point I'm trying to make about this is that sometimes, as the costume designer, are you not entitled to a percentage if they use your designs?
It depends on where the costumes end up once the production has had its run. If it's staged again somewhere else, then yes, of course, they need to pay me for the designs that they're using in that production.
Yeah. Morgan's had a fantastic career. If you look at the productions he's worked on and the shows he's worked on, it's some pretty massive productions he's worked on. And After going through and looking through his CV, a random question, which was possibly Richard might know the answer to this one. He worked for Opera Holland Park. Was that as a costume designer? So did we work with him at that side, or was he doing the set at that point?
I think he was normally at Holland Park. They're both costume and set, so he would
Oh,
have
okay.
done both. I mean, I was thinking listening to the interview. To have one mentor is lucky. To have three mentors is like, my God. And yeah, I mean, he's extraordinarily talented, but his path has been really quite extraordinary, I think, in terms of meeting the right people at the right time. I mean, who else goes to New York, on, on their work experience gig?
It's crazy, and the thing I found in fascinating is it's another course or university where he came from in Lippe that I knew of, but I didn't know it from the
Uh,
costume and set side. I knew it because of the entertainment side, musicians and actor side.
yeah, the McCartney
Yeah,
connection.
well, I actually knew it. There was a musician who came out years and years ago who it was basically billed every time in that press and everything was, oh, he's just come from Lip or he's already there, still there while he released the song, which was Liam Lynch at the time.
It was also nice that Morgan mentioned Lee Tassier, who's a friend of mine from way back, who's again a very nice guy, and they work together well, I think.
But I think that's the essence of what Morgan was saying, is that you can be given all the opportunities, but if you aren't somebody that can fit in and collaborate, then it's not you won't last the course, because it is so much about being a team player and being a good
Mm.
communicator, and all of those are very, very definite attributes of Morgan's, and I think that that's why in my instance I've had amazing working experiences with him, because we collaborate, we talk about our plans and where we're going, and then through the process there's a constant cross-referencing, and that ends up becoming very supportive.
Well, we hope you've been enjoying these conversations. We've been enjoying your feedback. If you have any requests or questions for us, please email them to podcast@angels.co.uk or visit us on our website. We are www.angelsbehindtheseams.com, or you can find us on social media. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram /costume podcast. And here is Jonathan's chat with Morgan Large.
Morgan, welcome to the Angels Behind the Scene podcast. It's lovely to have you here. You're somebody who I have been very excited to chat with, and I was very happy when you agreed to do it.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to speak to you, Jonathan. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a little while for lots of reasons, but initially, at the moment, it's because of the circumstances that we're all in with this COVID virus situation. And it was, as our audience is aware, because of the previous chats that we've been having, this was an opportunity for Jeremy, Richard, and I to kind of get together and try and explore a way in which we can illustrate to the audience, of people that are interested in coming into this business, but also people that are interested in the business and the aspect of costume and set design and how it functions and what kind of place it has in terms of the relevance within a dramatic piece. And we were going through a list of practitioners, of people who we thought would be interesting to chat to, and your name came up because we genuinely feel as a team here that you're somebody that has had such a fantastically broad experience of this world through design, and that encapsulates, in your instance, set and costume. If you don't mind, Morgan, I'm going to take you right back to your early days, your entry level, but very importantly, can I ask you where you trained to join the industry?
Yeah, I studied at LIPA, the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, a good few years ago now. But it's a stage school up in Liverpool that was set up by Paul McCartney. It's his old school, and in the mid 90s, it was redeveloped to become a performing arts school. So there are the courses of acting, music, drama, all the usual courses you'd expect, but there was also a performance design course. So when I was looking around about where to study, looking at the usual suspects, and I grew up just between Stoke and Manchester, in the middle of the Peak District, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And Liverpool didn't seem too far away from somebody growing up in the middle of the countryside. So I chose the closest to home, but also I went to look around LIPA and was just really excited by the buzz of the building. It's not a particularly massive school. And I was, one of the first few years of students to be taken on. So it was, relatively new. It was still finding its feet. But as soon as I walked through the doors, there was a great buzz, a great energy about the space. And I knew that was the place for me.
At that point, were you sort of mature or knowing enough to be aware that you were at the early stages of the structure of this environment? Was it an experiment? Was it something that had been tried and tested? And
I think I was one of the earliers, actually, Jonathan, that being one of the students there, it did feel as though they were finding their feet a little bit. I know since then, a lot of really good designers have come out of the course, but I felt I learned probably a lot more. Without putting LIPA down, I think I probably felt I've learned a lot more since graduating than I did when I was there. Should we start again? Because that's not very nice about LIPA, is it?
Well, no, it's not that it's not nice, but it's honest, and I think that in context of when you were there and the auspices with which you were working within, I think it's relevant. And so much of formal education is an experiment in terms of for the college, for the centre of education, but also for the student. And what we're finding actually is, and that is absolutely fascinating, is the expectation of the student in terms of what they think they're going to be getting as a result of these years of education. But what I'm particularly interested in, Morgan, is that you touched on, is that you said you come from, your background, if you like, is not in theatre and design, I assume, in terms of your family. What did you know about the world before you even realised that was the place that you wanted to focus on?
I knew very little. I was very naive. The only contact I'd had with theatre was from my school. My school used to put on pretty huge productions for a very small school back in the day, and I performed in them. And from that, I got this love for theatre. I was always probably quite shy, too shy to be a performer professionally, and I kind of realised that early on. And with my school, I played a couple of musical instruments as well, and we used to go with the school orchestra down to see those big 90s West End musicals. And I can remember sitting there as a child, and my chin dropping on the floor when I saw the design of those big 80s Cameron Andrews shows. And I knew I didn't want to be a performer back then. I always loved art. I always had this love for music, and I was always good at making stuff as well with my hands. I was really able to create with my hands. So I somehow realized that the job I do now was a way of combining all those skills together in one. Nobody in my family was in show business, but I had this dream and I had this desire, and I went out and found out myself, how I was going to achieve it.
I think that's amazing, because so often people, if you relate to my experience, I came into this business by default. I didn't know that such an environment existed. And it was only after I started working within it that it was like a light bulb moment. And, this is what I've always wanted to do. And that was without any formal education. And I only wish that when I'd been at school and I'd been working on all these, theatre productions that took place, I wish that I had the insight and the knowledge at that point to realize that this is something that you could actually do for a living. So the fact that you worked that out for yourself. Did you have like a fantastic, music stroke art teacher that was able to channel you, or a careers office?
All of the above. I had an amazing music teacher, I had an amazing art teacher, and the deputy head of the school was the co-director of the school production. So those three together just kind of pushed me forwards, and I blame it all on them, to be honest. I still do. I was very lucky. They all came down to watch Joseph at the Palladium last summer. So it was a real honour to go full circle with it. Yeah, it was pretty special.
Presumably because you invited them.
Of course, well, they were desperate to come, but I also invited them down.
Ah,
I think to your point, Jonathan, one of the interesting aspects about doing this for a living is everybody's journey is completely different. Do you know what I mean? You can study in it as you found yourself. You can you can find yourself there by accident. But every step along the way, and every other designer you come across, you know there are some similarities to people's stories, but everybody has to forge their own path. And it's fascinating in that way, where people have come from and how they've got to where they are.
did you start off with an aim in terms of how you were going to progress, or was it a fixed agenda, or has it evolved serendipitously because you've been in the right place at the right time and you've made the most of environments as they've been created around you in terms of employment?
I think so, yeah. I got into the industry, as I said. I end up designing a lot of musicals, and I think hopefully, I pour a lot of love into them because I actually love them myself. And, it's what introduced me to theatre, is musical theatre. And I don't think it's by any accident that I find myself designing quite a few musicals, because I love them. But it still takes it back to those early days where I still listen and absorb music. And even now, when designing a new show, the sound of a show absolutely influences of what ultimately the look of it's going to be. So I find myself in the early days, my dream was always to design a musical on the West End. And I found myself doing that at the age of 24. So after that, I then had to just recalibrate what my dream and what my ambition was going to be. And I think along the way, I tried to be a sponge. I tried to absorb and listen to people and to take information from people and learn from other people's skills around me. And I think ultimately now my dream is just to keep on getting better and better at what I do. And I think a lot of that comes through practice. And I don't ever, hopefully, pretend that I'm the expert, but I hope I lead the ship by inviting other people's opinions in, and then kind of processing that information and then delivering it out as a final product of a design.
What I've observed on the occasions that you and I have worked together on theatre job, and they've primarily been for working with Tom Sutherland. And I feel that we have a very cohesive, collaborative experience, in the sense that we, together with our lighting, with Tom, if you like, at the head of the pyramid, I think that we bring our best efforts together because, I hope you won't mind me saying it, Morgan, but I think it's because you're a very kind presence in the room, and you, just as you just described, in terms of how you balance the atmosphere that's around you and how your teams work around you, in the sense that it's not about the single person, it's about the collaborative experience. I think that it's through years of practice and observation of obviously how other people have worked that you're able to put that in place in the projects that you come to.
Well, that's very nice of you to say so, Jonathan. Thank you. I think we've had some very fortunate occasions working together, actually, where I think ultimately our styles match each other really well. And I guess what we should explain to the audience is that I don't always design set and costumes together. Every now and again, I kind of single them out. I either do costume design or set design. And I've been very lucky to work with you on those occasions where I've just taken one of those jobs on board. But I think, I hope so. I hope I bring that energy to the room. And I also hope that ultimately the end result, the show that we're putting on for an audience, is the most important part.
Yeah.
That's what that's what we as a team should all be striving towards. And it's not about self, it's not about ego. As long as it's right for the production, then I allow it to pass through, and I allow it to exist. And as soon as it's not about that, my instinct tells me it's not right. So I wave the flags up and I go, actually, we need to think about this. We need to collectively as a team work on this because it's not right. And I think it takes guts to do that. And I think it takes, as you say, a few years of creating an instinct to learn that it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it's smelling the room, isn't it? And it's not taking your eye off the ball. And importantly, this industry doesn't suffer fools ultimately.
No.
And I think that the onus upon us as creatives coming into a mix, and it's not going to be a straightforward procedure. And one of the questions I'd love to ask you is, do you actually notice that there are differences now in terms of your practice as a designer to how they were, however many years back when you first started designing? I know the scale of your projects shift in terms of you choose your work a lot to do with the narrative of the project, but also to do with the people that you're going to be working with. So there's that element. But I wonder, the world of producers, the world of the industry as such, do you see any differences?
I think so. I hope my process has become more streamlined for me. Everything we do as creatives in this industry is bespoke. So every new project you get, you're thrown into a world of which you've never kind of been put in that position before. And I think a lot of the important conversations happen very early on in a production, where as a team, as a creative team, you have to all come together to work out what your tone is going to be and what do we want to say with this production. So I think a lot of the time it's about repeating steps, and as soon as you know and you feel secure what direction everybody should be traveling in, I think then you can go forth and start to create. But I think again, I think it just takes, I think I've just become hopefully more streamlined, and you can start to rely on your previous experiences as well to inform what you're hoping to achieve. And I think ultimately with all of that experience comes a certain amount of confidence.
Yeah.
I think you can get a final product that you're happy with as a designer. I know designers who go about it in quite a blunt, I find ultimately quite a rude way, but I think you can get what you want and be happy with the final product by inviting people in and having a joyful time, using what we're creating entertainment ultimately at the end of the day. So I want to enjoy the process myself, and I'm very lucky to have a team of people around me who I have a great time with, and we put a lot of time, energy, and care into everything that we do. And I don't leave a project until I'm ultimately happy with it. But I think you can go about that with confidence, without arrogance, and still, deliver a really special show.
Do you have a strict criteria in terms of your work process? So have you got a studio that your ideas are formulated within that studio, or is it, is it a bedroom in your house? Is it, the back of the car? Is it, and then on that basis, do you invite people in to that environment to get the ideas initially floating around, or is it less structured than that?
No, I do have a studio. It's very close to my home, so it's for 10 years I also have a studio in my house, but for the past couple of years I've kind of outgrown myself, so I need basically more space and had a bigger team surrounding me. So so I now have a studio in Waterloo, and I have a core team who, Andrew, for example, has worked for me for the past 10 years, and he's a really close collaborator with me. But then there are a couple of more satellite model makers who come in to work for me on demand when I need them. That's kind of for the scenic side. When I'm designing costumes, I always have my go-to supervisors. I think it's a really key relationship between yourself and the supervisors. And there's a guy called Lee Tassie who I've worked with for a good few years now. We have a great time, but he has a great skill as well. And we're lucky to have that repertoire with each other. We can reference our previous shows when I'm trying to explain what I'm I'm after.
And then understanding that, when do you sometimes feel like that you take on work in order to feed the industry of people that you want to keep in sync with? Because understanding that the importance of collaboration and teams, and having people around you that you don't need to begin the communicative process time and time again. So in other words, there's a shorthand. And I wonder whether designers like yourself who are so busy, and not just, with London-centric work, but work that's taking place all over the country for a wide variety of different directors and production companies. Sometimes do you feel like you're on a treadmill because you need to keep all your reliable collaborators fed?
Yeah, sometimes I do. I'm lucky. I do feel lucky to, I've not had to tout for work for a while now, thankfully, and I'm lucky to be offered the work. And if something about it, if I get offered a show and I feel like there's something I could say about it, I find it really hard to say no sometimes, and I do. But I absolutely kind of love the guys who I work with, and it takes time for us to develop that shorthand together. So I don't want to. That's probably the most difficult thing about now, actually, is that I'm unable to support the guys who've been around me for the past few years. So it's really hard in this situation this summer to have all of that taken away from you at the moment. And I hope the industry can regenerate itself quickly enough so we can support all this talent around us, because that's what it is. It's kind of raw talent of all these skilled professionals, and people in the theatre are skilled in an unbelievable amount of different genres. It'd be a shame for those people to have to go into a different industry and use their talent elsewhere if we can't kind of regenerate.
Yeah, in order to make ends meet, it is a dilemma.
No, totally, absolutely. It really is.
Just going back to finishing your education and stepping into the big wide world of grown-up employment, did the college sort of recommend a career path? Did somebody come and see your work and offer you an internship or associate work within their team, or was it more about you writing letters and kind of campaigning to designers you admired?
A bit of both, really. Yeah, Lipper back in the day was still probably finding its feet about how it, what type of designers it was kind of creating. I was absolutely the only person in the school at that point who wanted to go and work in theatre, really, and professional theatre like that. So they didn't really know what to do with me. So I was lucky. I used to work the weekends at the Liverpool Playhouse just to make ends meet. And one day somebody came to the box office to get a ticket from me, and it was Hugh Vanstone, who is one of the best lighting designers in the world, and he's now still 20 years later, one of my best friends. But Hugh and I were talking, and I just said to him, look, I'd love to come and just, even though you're a lighting designer, I'm trained to be a set and costume designer. Can I come and do some work experience with you? And he said, absolutely, yes. So I went down to London and I went to New York to work on Bombay Dreams. Wow. when it went to Broadway as work experience, which was unbelievable. And then as soon as I graduated, I moved to London. I had friends from the year above me at Lipper who had moved down the year before, so I went and lived in their spare room, and I just started writing the letters. But by that point, I'd already had a few days, weeks work experience with Mark Thompson on Bombay Dreams, and having that name on my CV was really useful. And as soon as you write a letter to a designer, and somebody else's name is already on your CV, then suddenly they take more of an interest. So in those early years, I was flitting around between different designers, and I worked for Les Brotherston for a little while, Terry Parsons for a while, John Napier I worked with for a good while on a couple of shows, which was amazing because it was John's shows that I went down to the West End to see as a kid. And I remember kind of walking into his studio on the first day of working for him, and on the shelf was Norma's House from Sunset Boulevard and the model box for Starlight Express and all those kind of things. And again, my chin hit the floor. And it was amazing to be. I loved being an associate because I was confident. As I said, I was always good at model making, so I was useful to them, and I found myself getting re-employed because of that. But it was more than that. To be able to be in John's studio, and I can remember we working on this massive show where we could both basically fit inside the model box, and I can remember standing inside this model box with John, and we had a conversation, and I remember thinking our brains were thinking exactly the same thing at the same point. We had a conversation, a bit of a laugh about it, and that again gave me a bit more confidence. I thought, you know what, I'm thinking the right way to do this. And then after I finished for John, I worked for Christopher Oram for a long time, for about 7 years overall, and I got my job through Christopher just by chance. He was designing Guys and Dolls in the West End with Ewan McGregor and Jane Krakowski and Jenna Russell.
That was the Donmar production, wasn't it?
It was produced by the Donmar, but it was the Piccadilly, so it was
Yeah.
the Donmar in the West End. And my letter landed on Christopher's desk the morning he was looking for somebody. So
Wow.
that was very fortuitous, and I ended up staying there for 7 years, and that was an amazing time. And we worked on some incredible shows, and it was just that time that him and Michael were just leaving Sheffield to go to the Donmar.
Right.
So I was very, very fortunate to be with them throughout that whole journey, which was unforgettable.
Isn't that remarkable, that if the serendipity, but also the how fortunate or fortuitous that, you know, the not just the timing of it, but also the fact that you targeted the right practitioners, and the result is that your world became so broad, because you're talking about, if you like, the grand masters of a generation, from Terry to John and Les and Christopher. And in fact, we've got a planned interview scheduled for a couple of weeks with Christopher, and but each one of them has got a completely unique take on narrative and dramaturge and process. So you're really, if you like, bathing within the bath of the gods, because the experience must have just been truly amazing. I can't imagine a better grounding.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I was very lucky how it happened. It was, but I hope I took those years and I absorbed information from them. I was useful to them, but I was also, it's a very unique job in itself. If any of the listeners want to begin a career in design, a lot of people go through this kind of assisting associate route. I mean, a lot of people don't. Some people go straight into the deep end and start doing it for real and learn on the case. But for me, this was my route. This is what I chose to do. And it was, I think part of the trap of being an associate is, obviously, as a designer, you are required to match match the style of the designers that you're working for. So I think part of the skill after you finish associating is to find your own style and work out what do you want to say.
What was the job that gave you the opportunity to do that? What was the first design opportunity?
How it happened, I was working for Christopher, and I started to get my own work. And my own work then just started to generate, it just started to snowball a little bit, where the shows just kept on getting bigger and bigger. So I couldn't finish a day working for Christopher and then go and do my own shows in the evening. So I had to then started to take 3 months off to design my own shows and then go back to Christopher. The first big show I did a touring production of Footloose, commercial theatre. But it was, again, I was fortuitous. I met the producer one night at the Old Vic, and he said, "What do you do?" I said, I'm a designer. I said, "I need a designer." He said, "Do you want to come and show me your portfolio tomorrow?" And I did, and I got the design job of Footloose, which was my first West End show, which was around for 5 years. And from there, I just started to meet other people that I hadn't met before, kind of practitioners, producers, directors, and then slowly but surely, just the work started to generate itself.
At what point did an agent come into your mix in terms of how you would process contracts and sort out meetings and things?
Again, lucky. I had an agent before, really early on, actually. How I got the job with John Napier was to write to his agent and said, I'd love to assist John. Would you mind passing on this letter to him? By then, I had a couple of things on my CV. So the agent wrote back initially and said, actually, John's not looking for somebody at the moment, but would you like to be represented by us? So that's how I got my agent. So I didn't have to go out and find one, which was, again, very lucky.
Well, you know what? You say lucky, but actually, Morgan, it's focus and determination, and also I think it's having a certain wherewithal in terms of the world that you're functioning within that gets results. And I think so many people either graduate or come from an environment where there is a sense of entitlement and the world owes them a living. And actually, that is not going to take you very far in the environment that we work within, because it's all about listening and fitting in and having a core, which, you know, evidently from everything that you've been saying you have, and seeing it through, which means focus. I think that what is, you know, so clear in terms of everything that we've been chatting about is that in order to achieve anything, including your own self-respect, you have got to explore every aspect of not just yourself, but what makes this world tick. Yeah, I think it's exciting to hear that you've kind of had that journey, and you're in the position that you're in now, where, you know, with the exception of this current situation, but where the work is flowing, and you're working with different directors, and you're enjoying you're reaping the benefits, if you like, with awards and acknowledgements and the approval of your peers. And I think that's great. There's one more thing that I wanted to just touch on, was that as a designer, you know, so much of what you bring to the project is what drives narrative forward. And it's your relationship with your other creatives, but very importantly, the director and performers, in terms of how they are able to then process their work. Aside from having the understanding of the narrative, so if we take something like Joseph, which was a huge success last year at the Palladium and had wonderful reviews and fantastic audiences, and it was supposed to be coming back this summer, or is it delayed until next summer?
Yeah, it was meant to be coming back this summer for another limited run at the Palladium, but it's coming back next summer at the same dates, and then hopefully a couple more productions after that.
The fact that it's in a repertoire and that it's considered worthy of presenting time and time again is a fantastic achievement. But with something like Joseph, it's a familiar territory in terms of the actual show. And you obviously have the conversation that, you know, we're doing it like this. And what do you think about that, Morgan? And what can you do? But aside from that, which takes a huge amount of energy and creative process, how do you then, you then have to embrace the technology. You have to you have to be one step ahead of all of the devices that are now in place, that as we progress in terms of stage effect and digital work and projection and how to drive narrative forward. And I wonder whether is that something that ordinarily, you know, interests you on a day-to-day basis? Are you forever exploring different, if you like, scientific processes in terms of where we're at technologically?
Not really. I'm a bit rubbish at that, to be honest. I think on Joseph, it was a little bit cart before horse in a way, where through our conversations between myself and Lawrence, we storyboarded the show, and we ultimately storytelling won at the end of the day. And we kept it as a concept relatively simple. The design is this kind of open, this blue box which transforms itself. From a child's perspective, that we start piece by having a group of children being read a story around a campfire. And then our concept was to allow these children's imaginations to then take over and be quite anarchic in a way with our response to it. So just to be cheeky and naughty, and ultimately bring out a lot of the humor that's already in the story. So what we did, we took the show, and we all knew it inside out anyway, but we just thought, okay, well, what else can we do here? And maybe when we go to Canaan, maybe our introduction to the brothers is, you know, they're in this Bedouin tent. So, you know, so the whole number takes place during this Bedouin tent, and the introduction to the brothers and their costumes and their characters. But then we know by the music that this tent needs to disappear because the dreamer has to go. As soon as that happens, we're in the next scene. So how do you make this tent disappear, which is, you know, in about 2 seconds? So we kind of set ourselves the problem, and then had to then go and find the technology to solve it. So we did it. We created this tent on stage, and during this number, by using 5 solenoid magnets and a high-speed winch, we were able to get this tent to just collapse in itself and be kind of sucked into the sky. So I think we set ourselves the problems, and then you have to then find a technology to solve it for you. But I guess I'm an inquisitive person. I like to go and nosy around in different things. And there was a lot of technology, even from like the dream coat was all kind of embroidered by an amazing embroidery company in East London on a computerized embroidery machine, which I'd never kind of worked with before. So I designed the coat. I knew I wanted it to reflect tone and the textures of clothing, during that time. But how can we use modern technology to make that, and to make it affordable? And what is that process? So I designed it, and then we went out as a team to work out how we were going to achieve it.
Yeah.
So the technology is there. We'd be foolish not to use it. I don't think you need to be an expert in all of the technology around it, but I think it's our job to create the problems, and then as a team we can go out and discover a way of solving them.
But always with the mind that it has to fit into the narrative. It can't overtake.
No.
And I think that's a very important point, because there are practitioners out there that don't adhere to that philosophy.
Yeah.
And you end up with this sort of substance over matter.
Yeah, absolutely. It can end up looking like a show where a designer is saying, look at me, I'm showing off now, but I'm not delivering a story. I think ultimately we are storytellers. We're visual storytellers, and it's our job and our duty to, people spend a lot of money on these tickets for shows. So it's our duty to treat them with integrity. And I think as soon as you stray away from that and kind of trying to bamboozle people with tech, then you dilute the ultimate effect of what you're trying to achieve.
Bearing that thought in mind, is there for you perhaps more resonance when you're working on something that's familiar, i.e. Joseph or Woman in White or Death Takes a Holiday, which was previously produced, or something like Ruthless, which is kind of like brand new, and Wonderland, which you're there at the start, you are the concept.
Yeah.
Is there a preference, or it doesn't matter? It's a team of people that are around you and how it comes together.
My process wouldn't be any different. I treat them all the same. I think the only thing if I'm designing a show that's been designed before, I try not to. I prefer not to know what how it was achieved before. Sometimes it's difficult for a show like Joseph not to know what Joseph looked like previously. But I think through those conversations with the director, you can, when you're starting to work out the tone, you end up going off in a different direction anyway. But always keeping an eye, on what's been done before, because sometimes by no accident that your brain ends up with the same solutions as somebody else has. So if you find yourself going off in that direction, then let's take it somewhere else and see what else we can come up with.
Yeah, it's beholden on you to bring that to the piece, because otherwise, if you like, what's the point?
What is the point? Yeah, exactly.
And tell me, have you yearnings to be a director? Would you like to control the narrative in that respect from that point of view, like a director designer?
Yeah, I think so, or producer maybe. I'd like to start to initiate some of my own work in a way. I'd like to start to think about getting teams together to tell particular stories and maybe produce something that I've not necessarily designed myself or done both. Or yeah, I think I'd like to give it a go.
And is that something that's a new piece of work, or something that you know and love, and you think, what, I'd love to get my hands on that and have a go and reimagine it?
A bit of both. Probably a bit of both. Watch this space is all I'm going to say.
Well, no, I will watch the space, because I think that the passion that you have and the way that you approach a project, especially in everything that you've just been saying, is generous, and I'm quite excited to know what will come next. So tell me, Morgan, is there a single piece of advice that you would offer to somebody wanting to become a designer working within our industry today? I
think ultimately you just be kind to people, just treat people with respect, and ultimately people will kind of treat you with respect back. I think we especially in these crazy times, we just need to all look after each other, because we're going through very difficult circumstances, and what we do is a very delicate thing. It's a very personal response as well. And I think it's not like we're just show machines, but a lot of what we do comes from oneself. Do you know what I mean? Our responses to the work is a personal response, and it's a collection of, you know, as a designer, my response to a show is it kind of images and collections and moments I've had in my life that I remember and kind of draw on to then put together as a piece. And I find it, I think ultimately, it's kind of probably forgotten how much of an impact on a final piece a designer has. Obviously, you're in charge of what everything that everybody is looking at, and I think a lot of the time that's forgotten about. You can have a huge effect on how people feel, and we have a power in that respect of how.
The psychology of
the psychology behind it, yeah,
of the practice is just intriguing, and it's actually stepping into the, from my own point of view, stepping into the world, you know, however many years ago as a designer, having, you know, spent so many years working here and associating from here as assistants to costume designers, just mind-blowing how one can successfully navigate through this world, and also, you know, the importance of being able to keep a check on yourself. And, you know, we've all been in situations where we felt that circumstances are kind of mounting beyond our control, and how we approach that and how we deal with it, and how we can sometimes possibly need to have that strength to step out of it and you know, segue off into a different direction. But I think in terms of everything that we've just been talking about and getting an insight into your working life, Morgan, I think we've done well. We could have actually gone on for much longer. I mean, there is one thing that, just drawing on your designing in total, is there a preference in terms of whether you do sets or costumes? Do you have in your own mind, do you spend more time on the set or more time on the costume, or is it determined by whatever the nature of the piece is?
It's determined on whatever the nature of the piece is. With the set design, you tend to get more time to nurture it because the work is separate from the production. Do you know what I mean? I can work months in advance on a design and work out to a particular degree of detail exactly what I want it to be, and then it's my job to pass that information on to the set builders and the rest of the team. I find it with costume, it seems to be a lot more pressurized towards the production date. Obviously, your canvas doesn't exist necessarily until the first day of rehearsal, so it seems to be, especially on a big musical, it seems to be all hands on deck, the last minute to deliver. And I wish we had more time, a lot of the time, to go through the process with more. I'd like to be able to I mean, basically, the older I'm getting, the more I like to dabble and change things and tweak things here and there. But it's less easy to do that when you're pressurized with time.
You're right, but actually, what you've learned because of understanding those circumstances, your work in terms of knowing the order of events and your work for set is at a point where you can then switch onto costume and give that the focus that it needs at that point. So, you know, you've sort of you've answered your own question in the sense that there isn't a preference for one or the other. It's determined by the whole process, and the time that you're able to give to it within the structure of the production.
Yeah, a lot of the job is about time management. You need to know when to switch from one job to the other to create, you know, to get to that end result. And it does get very pressurized towards the end of that process. When rehearsals start is when you get your cast members for the first time to dress, and you're a matter of days away from when the costumes are going to be on stage. So that's a huge pressurized environment, and it's thousands of little strands of information, and, you know, making sure people are in the right place and all the makers turn up. It's the logistics of it on a big show especially is very difficult,
including the psychology of the
performer. Including the psychology of the performer. And also, you know, on musicals, a lot of the costumes have to perform. They're dance costumes at the end of the day. And at that point, you don't necessarily know what the choreography is going to be. So it's I always find myself just dipping into rehearsal to see what the movements are going to be, just so then you can re-inform the rest of the team what actually the costumes need to achieve. And it's that flexibility that's required, but also the ability to keep cool under the pressure is really important.
Well, you know what, Morgan, this has been brilliant. Thank you very much, and I'm inspired actually, and I can't wait to work with you again.
Oh, Jonathan, it's so lovely to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Thank you.
That was Jonathan's conversation with Morgan Large. I think that's the first time as well with all the theatre people we've spoken to that I heard sort of like in my head a nice clear reason why when you do both, why it might be more appealing to do the set at times, because if you've got that longer window to prepare for everything, and it seems much better timings than they get with costume, I can see why that would appeal.
And I
as
think
well.
that the jobs that I've worked with Morgan on, where he has split set and costume, and I've done the costume, have been compromised in exactly what you just said, the timing, and it physically wouldn't be possible in order to present something that you would be proud of within that time frame.
And the other thing which I thought was nice that came out is he's another person who believes in basically the personality or the behavior, if that makes sense. Be nice towards people, and that seems to be a nice thing that's coming out now, which is everyone does seem to care about other people's well-being and basically creating a nice atmosphere, because that's, you just don't want it. Vivine, Morgan, David, I mean, all these people are all talking about that is one of the most important things to them, and it's so refreshing.
It's important to be fair.
I mean, the job is so hard and so pressurized that you really don't want to be fighting little wars with people within your team, or even as part of the larger production. You have to bring everybody in along at the same time, don't you?
Definitely.
And I've learned a new phrase: smelling the room.
Yes.
which actually is perfect.
Yeah, much. I don't know why I preferred it. I prefer it to dipping your toe in or something like that. Smelling the room.
Well, hopefully it will always smell of roses.
I'm sure it will.
The next conversation that we are going to be releasing is Richard's with the two Charlottes, Charlotte Sewell and Charlotte Finley.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and both of them are again seasoned veterans of costume and wardrobe, but in fact we're mostly talking to them about their Beck 2 roles, which certainly over the last sort of 3 or 4 months has become increasingly more and more important as jobs have just dried up. So it's we wanted to get it in, and I think it's a very valid thing to issue at this point.
Definitely.
I think that the fact that our sector is underrepresented in terms of its place in the structure of creative structure, this opportunity at this time, in order to expand the membership and to give them a voice, is very important.
Yeah, and they have worked incredibly hard, all of them.
Going to be a very interesting chat to release and for everyone to hear about. Back to representation, protection, I suppose, is the other key word with all of that. So that will be our next interview that we release. And here is a small excerpt from that conversation between Richard and Charlotte Sewell and Charlotte Finley.
Rihanna and Sarah did an amazing thing called Zoom on Art, which connected BAME members who work in costume with HODs from costume, and then they broke out into little breakout rooms on Zoom so they could all meet. It was like speed dating but for meetings. So in every session you could meet 3 different workers and they could make some connections. So they had 60 HODs, over 180 connections made, and I think it was a really good pattern for all sorts of things, not just diversity, maybe school leavers, college leavers, just to do some connections so that people don't feel a bit like it's an elitist industry and they can't get into it. That's what we're also promoting.
And it's good for us who receive the emails with the CVs, and if we've seen the person's face and had a chat, it sort of makes it much more likely, really, that we would employ them, because you know who you're dealing with and who you get on with. It was really, really interesting.